The cottage stood alone on the desolate stretch of the moors, a hunched and ancient thing that seemed less built and grown from the bruised earth. Silas had sought isolation, a place where the clamor of the world couldn't reach him, a sanctuary for frayed nerves and a restless mind. The listing sign had promised solitude, peace. It lied. The silence here was not empty. It was heavy, thick with an unseen presence that pressed him from the moment he turned the key in the rusty lock. The air inside was perpetually cold, regardless of the roaring peat fire, carrying the scent of damp stone, and something else, something like dry tears and old dread. The first few weeks were a battle against the mundane discomforts of drafts that sang mournfully through cracked panes, mice that scurried in the wainscoting like tiny, frantic ghosts, the constant, low groan of the house settling deeper into the boggy ground. But beneath the surface of these familiar nuisances, a subtle current of wrongness flowed. Objects seemed to shift when his back was turned. A floorboard would creak upstairs when he was alone downstairs. The shadows in the corners felt not just dark, but occupied. One rain-lashed afternoon, driven by a sudden, irrational compulsion, Silas began to peel back a section of the floral wallpaper in the main bedroom. It was faded, peeling in strips already, but a specific patch near the hearth drew his eye. His fingers, cold and strangely clumsy, tore at the brittle paper. Beneath it wasn't plaster, but an older layer, and beneath that, scratched directly into the crumbling gray substance, was writing. An even, desperate script that looked as though it had been clawed there. He brushed away dust and plaster crumbs, his heart hammering against his ribs. The writing wasn't an ancient inscription, it was English. Modern English. And as he read, a profound, sickening dread bloomed in his gut. He knows I'd hear the first line read, followed by "Don't look behind you," and then chillingly, I can hear him breathing outside the door. Is that you, Silas? Silas stumbled back, breath catching in his throat. His name. How could it know his name? He had told anyone exactly where he was going, seeking total disconnection. He forced himself to look again, peeling away more paper. The writing continued, a fragmented journal of terror. It spoke of being watched, of whispers that promised pain, of an entity that wore familiar shapes, but felt utterly alien. It described the layout of the house, with unnerving accuracy, moments of desperate hiding, the feeling of being trapped. I thought I was alone, but am not. He watches through the cracks, he waits. The entries became more frantic, more repetitive. Descriptions of the cold, the silence, the waiting. And then came the detail that snapped the last thread of his composure. One passage described finding comfort in a specific, broken teacup in the kitchen of the same teacup Silas himself had favored since arriving. Another mentioned a recurring dream of a black hound scratching at the window, a dream Silas had suffered just the previous night. The horrible truth began to coalesce, a cold dread seeping into his very bones. The writing wasn't from a previous occupant. The fear, the isolation, the specific details, they were his. But he didn't remember writing them. Not consciously. It was as if another part of him, trapped somehow within the very fabric of the house, had been chronicling his own descent. A presence in the house intensified tenfold. The whispers were no longer subtle. They were audible, though indistinct, seeming to coil from the air itself. Shadows writhed at the edges of his vision. He felt eyes on him constantly, cold, assessing, waiting. Sleep offered no respite, only nightmares that echoed the terror scratched into the wall. He spent hours staring at the wall, peeling more paper, finding more of the tortured script, a map of his own unraveling. He's getting closer. I can feel him inside wanting out. Let him out, Silas. The warnings were directed at him, from himself, a desperate plea across some invisible barrier of time or sanity. The climax arrived not with a bang, but a slow, suffocating pressure. He was standing by the wall, tracing the fearful words, when a wave of dizzying vertigo washed over him. The room seemed to tilt, the air growing thick and viscous. The whispers surged, coalescing into a single, sibilant command, "Right." His hand, seemingly not his own, twitched. He felt a profound shift, a part of his consciousness being drawn back into the plaster, into the cold, waiting space behind the wall. The pen he held clattered to the floor, forgotten. His gaze was fixed on the wall, on the blank spaces between the old, fearful entries. He raised a finger, cold and trembling, and began to scratch. The plaster flaked under his nail. He didn't know what he was writing, but he knew he had to. He was the new scribe, chronicling the fear for the next soul foolish enough to seek solitude here. The cottage was not a sanctuary, it was a cage, and he was just the latest bird to forget how to fly, destined to whisper his warnings from behind the wallpaper, forever.